President Biden, who is not in New York, obviously. He is not in Washington. He is out in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, where he is spending part of his August. Mike Memoli is traveling with the president. And Mem, even though the president is not talking about the former president and his allies sure are talking about Joe Biden, and even more so his son, Hunter Biden. The president has tried to keep an arm's length distance from this. He doesn't want to talk about it. He wants to show, right, that the White House, the executive branch, has a level of distance from the other piece of the executive branch, the Department of Justice here in this investigation. And yet we have seen cranked up to an 11, frankly, the sort of Hunter Biden attacks today, and Republican allies of the former president trying to draw an equivalency here with, of course, President Biden's son, Hunter, agreeing to that plea deal, essentially, the ongoing investigation against him for unrelated reasons having to do with taxes, et cetera.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. I mean, and what I hear from Biden allies, from Democratic sources, whenever we raise what Republicans are trying to make, the case they're trying to make about Hunter Biden, they say this is very obviously a strategy designed to draw a false equivalency between the former president's legal troubles and what the president and his family may or may not be facing in terms of investigations on Capitol Hill. They're actually arguing that this is intentional, that there is a coincidence. They point to a pattern of instances when the former president gets indicted or faces some sort of new revelation as it relates to the various probes that are landing him in federal court, with actions that the House Oversight Committee is taking, for instance. We saw today, timed to what we knew was happening all day with the former president, the House Oversight Committee released sooner than we were expecting, frankly, a full transcript of the interview that took place just a few days ago with Devin Archer. He's a former business partner of Hunter Biden. And in that closed-door testimony, we see in plain writing now the repeated denials on the part of Devin Archer that any of the interactions that were happening between Hunter Biden and his father by telephone when Hunter Biden was sitting down with some business partners were not about what Republicans were trying to say, which was, an example of his involvement with his businesses, but much more routine. And so as we're talking about this repeated White House strategy, which is to not comment, to make it clear that there is a firewall between the Justice Department and the president himself, I'm really struck by the contrast, Sally, as we've been spending the week here. It was Tuesday night, as Jack Smith was addressing the nation, talking about the charges that he was unsealing at that point. The president was on his way to dinner. He was going to the movies with the First Lady. Today, we saw him again riding his bike, the former president getting off of his plane in Washington, wearing a dark suit and a red tie, with the former president here wearing a bathing suit with turtles on it, right? So these are the kind of split-screen moments that we're seeing throughout the week that are just so jarring. And frankly, the Biden team likes it that way. They sort of enjoy this split screen of a president who's got his head down, is focused, well, this week focused on a little bit of R&R, but otherwise has been focused on governing, while Trump has just been continued to be a wrecking ball in politics, very bombastic on social media and other settings as well. And that's the strategy we're going to continue to see play out in the months ahead.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.